When we create and manage materials, we can certainly do it through the attribute editor, but probably a more efficient way to manage materials is to use what's called the Hypershade window. Now, the Hypershade window can be found in one of two places. We can go to Windows, Rendering Editors, Hypershade, and notice this little icon because we see it here in the interface on the status line. So if I click this little Hypershade node, it brings up the Hypershade window. Now, this window has a lot of stuff, but it's really actually fairly straightforward. Now, along the top, we have a number of menus here, and these all basically just duplicate stuff that we have in the visual interface. So I'm going to focus mostly on this visual interface. Now, the interface itself can be rearranged. You can select any one of these windows and move them around, delete them, do whatever. I'm going to stick with the default interface here. Now, up in the top left-hand corner, we have the browser, and this allows us to browse through different types of materials. And notice how when I click on the material, they show up here. Now, this browser is not just for materials. We can also browse through textures. So if I want to take a look at individual textures, I can do that. We also have utilities, rendering, lights, so I can see the lights in my scene, cameras, and so on. I'm going to go back to the Materials tab here, and let's go ahead and click on the wood stained material. And this will show up here along the right. On the top, we have a material viewer. Now, this allows you to see a rendered view of your material. And we can render this either with the hardware renderer, which looks like this, or the Arnold renderer. Now, the Arnold renderer is a little bit slower because it is actually rendering the scene using Arnold. And if we want to, we can switch between these. So I'm going to go ahead and put it on hardware. And then I can zoom in on this window by holding down Alt and dragging. It's very much like a viewport in Maya. So I want to make sure that that is centered, our shader ball. Now, we can change this from the shader ball to any sort of object. So if we're working on something like cloth, we can do that. We also have teapots. We have a splash of glass here. And then we also have basic spheres and planes. I'm going to put this back at shader ball. And then we can also change what is lighting the scene here. So right now it's by default interior color. We also have interior neutral. And we see this a little bit better in the Arnold tab here. So we can also go to an exterior scene and so on. So we have a number of image-based lighting sources here that will give you a good idea what this will look like. I'm going to switch it back to Interior 1 and Hardware. Now, along the bottom, we have the Property Editor, and this should be familiar to you because this is almost identical to what we see in the Attribute Editor, and this is really where we control our material. So if I wanted to, I could dial up transparency, I could turn on or off ambient color, and so on. So this is everything that we have in the Attribute Editor. And in fact, if you select this, you can see that if I bring up the attribute editor, it will bring this up. So if I click on a different material, it actually does show up in the attribute editor. Now, along the left-hand side, we have the ability to create our own nodes. So this will change depending upon what renderer you have installed. But right now I have Maya. So these are all the basic Maya materials and surfaces, as well as Arnold. So we have all the Arnold materials and surfaces, as well as lights. So we also have Maya and Arnold lights in here as well. Now, in addition to this, we have one more window here in the center, and that's called a node editor. Now, this is very similar to the hypergraph, and it allows you to look at your materials as a node. So if I were to select, say, wood stain, I can right-click over this and say Graph Network. And when I graph that network, it shows you how this is all connected. Now, I have a number of different nodes here, and I can navigate this just the same way I navigate a viewport. So I can pan and zoom. Now, this is a 2D viewport, so I can't tumble. Now, if I zoom in here, you'll see I have my wood-stained material, and that goes out to a shader group. But on the input side of this, we have the actual bitmap here. So you can see here I can very easily navigate and switch between all of my different attribute panels that I would normally see in the attribute editor. And this is a great way to navigate and visualize your material. So you can see that this place 2D texture is connected to my wood grain, and that's connected to my main material. Now, if I click on my connection icons here, if I click on this little down arrow, notice how it goes down to that same wood stain. So these are some of the basics of the Hypershade window. And this is a great way to view all the materials in your scene as well as edit and manipulate them.